Ava Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse, watching the lights of San Francisco shimmer like 1,000 promises she no longer believed in. Below, the city pulsed with life. Couples laughing on their way to dinner, cabs darting between sleek black Teslas, the glow of late-night cafes humming with conversation. Up here, 30 stories above it all, Ava was alone. She set down her champagne flute on the marble counter, its delicate stem catching a glint of the city's neon heartbeat. The celebration had ended hours ago. Her legal team had gone home, the caterers had cleared the last of the lobster sliders, and her assistant had murmured congratulations before slipping out into the night. Ava had closed a deal that made headlines, merging her AI startup with a tech giant, adding another zero to her net worth. And yet, here she was, barefoot in a silk dress, gazing out at a world she no longer knew how to touch. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Daniel Pierce. Her heart stuttered. She picked it up, thumb hovering over the screen, reading the brief text. "We need to talk." "Tomorrow night?" She exhaled slowly, setting the phone face down. Daniel. Handsome, brilliant, magnetic. A man who could command a room with a glance and dismantle her defenses with a soft word. They had met 2 years ago at a fundraiser for pediatric cancer research. A picture-perfect power couple framed in every society page since. But lately, his kisses had felt distracted, his touch absent-minded. She knew his pattern too well. When he began pulling away, it was only a matter of time. Ava walked to the vanity and sat, brushing her thick auburn hair absently, watching herself in the mirror. 42. They all said she didn't look it. The magazines called her a tech phenom and a visionary. But when she looked into her own eyes, she saw exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of late nights at the office, but of fighting a private war with her own body. Her gaze shifted to the slim stack of folders on her nightstand. IVF protocols. Blood work. Failed rounds. 3 years of trying, hoping, blaming herself for every negative result. And Daniel, pacing in the background, his impatience sharpening with each passing month. She rose and walked barefoot across the polished hardwood to the terrace, stepping into the cool night air. The wind lifted the hem of her dress, wrapping it around her legs like a silk cocoon. This was the dream, wasn't it? This view, this address, this life. But no one told her how quiet it would be at the top. No one warned her that success could echo, that luxury could feel like a locked room. Her mind drifted to her mother's small house back in Ohio, where Friday nights meant folding laundry on the couch and Saturday mornings were spent watching her niece's soccer games. Ava had built an empire to prove she could outrun all of that. The small-town expectations, the poverty, the whispered judgments. And yet in some ways, she had built her own kind of prison. The soft chime of the elevator startled her. She turned, heart quickening, but it was only the building staff dropping off tomorrow's newspaper. She closed her eyes, leaning into the railing. She didn't cry. Ava Sterling hadn't cried in years. Not when her father left. Not when her first company nearly collapsed. Not when the third IVF cycle failed. But tonight, with the city glittering at her feet, she felt something slip inside her. A thin crack running through the armor she'd spent decades building. Back inside, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Sophie. "Want company? I have wine and no judgment." A faint smile tugged at Ava's lips. Sophie, her anchor, her only constant. A single mom working as a school counselor, Sophie had never cared about Ava's money or her headlines. She cared about Ava. Ava typed back, "Not tonight." "Tomorrow?" She set the phone down, turned off the lights, and slipped into bed, alone in a king-size island of cool sheets. As she lay in the dark, the soft pulse of the city beneath her, Ava felt the ache of her life pressing in. Not just the ache of a failing relationship, but of years spent chasing something she couldn't name. And somewhere deep in her chest, a voice she'd kept buried whispered the truth she was almost ready to hear. It's not the empire that's breaking. It's you. Tomorrow, Daniel would say the words she already knew were coming. And maybe, just maybe, that would be the night Ava Sterling stopped waiting for someone else to save her. Ava adjusted the cuff of her silk blouse, glancing once more at the mirror by the elevator. She looked impeccable. Of course she did. A woman like her didn't leave the penthouse without the armor polished. But as the elevator glided silently down to the private garage, her hands trembled just enough that she curled them into fists. Daniel had insisted they meet at Jardin, the sleek little restaurant where they'd had their first date. She wondered if it was meant to soften the blow. Outside, the night was crisp, the air perfumed with eucalyptus and money. Jardin's valet whisked away her car with the kind of deference reserved for people who own too many homes and not enough time. Inside, she was greeted with the familiar hush of fine dining, low lights, murmured laughter, the scent of truffle oil. And there he was. Daniel Pierce stood by the corner table, one hand tucked into his pocket, the other swirling a glass of Barolo as if he had all the time in the world. Tall, silver at his temples, dark suit, immaculate. When he saw her, his mouth lifted into that half-smile that had once melted her defenses. Tonight, though, it felt like a shield. "Ava," he said softly, rising to pull out her chair. She kissed his cheek, a polite brush, and sat. Daniel. For a moment, they studied each other. Two perfectly sculpted lives, polished to a gleam, but Ava could feel the cracks widening between them. The waiter arrived. A bottle was already open, glasses already poured. Typical Daniel, decisive, controlling, efficient. She sipped, wishing the wine would warm the chill in her chest. He folded his hands. "I won't drag this out." Of course not. Daniel Pierce didn't drag things out. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, voice smooth as marble. "About us. About the future." Ava swallowed, heart tapping against her ribs. "I want children, Ava," he said bluntly. "You know that, and we've tried." "God knows we've tried." He ran a hand through his hair. "But we have to face the reality that it's not happening." Her throat tightened. "So, you're saying—" "I'm saying," Daniel cut in, his gaze sharp, "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep hoping for something that isn't coming." The air between them seemed to thin. Ava stared at him. She thought of the hormone shots, the doctor visits, the endless bruises on her abdomen, the quiet ache of failure that wrapped itself around her like a second skin. She thought of the times he'd promised they were in this together, of the nights he held her in the dark when she cried into his shoulder. And now, this. Her voice was low. "So that's it." Daniel looked away, jaw tight. "I'm sorry, Ava, but I want a family." "You know what that means to me?" A bitter laugh caught in her throat. "A family? Or an heir?" His eyes flashed back to hers, sharp, defensive. "I'm not a dynasty, Daniel," she whispered. "I'm a woman you claim to love." He exhaled, long and weary, as if she were the one exhausting him. "I do love you, but love doesn't fix everything." For a moment, Ava saw not the powerful man across the table, but the boy beneath the suit. The boy desperate to live up to his father's shadow, terrified of failing at the one thing he thought mattered most. The waiter arrived with their entrees, but neither of them touched the plates. Ava sat back, pressing her napkin to her lips. "I see. I'll make sure things are handled discreetly." Daniel said quietly. "I've already spoken to my lawyer." There it was, the efficiency again, the calculated detachment. He wasn't cruel, but he was cutting himself free, clean, and fast. Ava reached for her bag, rising to her feet. "Enjoy your dinner, Daniel." He stood too quickly, brushing against her arm, as if part of him wanted to stop her, say more. But he only murmured, "Ava." She shook her head. "Don't." Outside, the air hit her like a slap, sharp, cold, honest. She walked briskly to the valet stand, arms wrapped around herself. "Miss Sterling?" She turned. Sophie stood on the sidewalk, out of breath, clutching a takeout bag. Her dark curls were wind-blown, and her cheeks were flushed. "I thought you might need backup." Ava let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "You always know." "Of course I do." Sophie looped her arm through Ava's. "Let's go home. I brought pad thai and chocolate cake." As they slid into Sophie's car, Ava gazed back once, just once, at the warm glow of Jarden. Through the glass, she saw Daniel, head bowed over his wine, shoulders slumped. A king at a table built for two, now dining alone. Ava turned away. The empire was intact. The woman inside was cracking. But maybe, just maybe, something new could be built from the rubble. Ava sat cross-legged on Sophie's couch, cradling a mug of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. The glow of the city lights flickered beyond Sophie's apartment window. But here inside, the world felt quiet. A rare sanctuary from the clamor of boardrooms and luxury penthouses. Sophie padded in from the kitchen, barefoot, wearing old yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt that said, "Strong as hell." She dropped onto the couch beside Ava, setting a half-eaten slice of chocolate cake on the coffee table. "So," Sophie said softly, "how spectacularly did he screw this up?" Ava's lips twitched into something close to a smile. "Spectacular doesn't quite cover it." Sophie leaned back, pulling her knees up under her. "Talk to me." For a moment, Ava stared down into her mug, fingers tightening around the ceramic. "He's done." "We're done. He wants an heir. And apparently love doesn't count if you can't guarantee that." Sophie let out a low whistle. "Wow, that's medieval." Ava shook her head, a hollow laugh escaping her. "I should have seen it coming. Daniel's never been a man who tolerates failure. Not in business. Not in me." Sophie reached over, placing a steady hand on Ava's knee. "Hey, that's not on you. You've been through hell trying to make this work. You twisted yourself into knots. If he can't love you for who you are now, without some fairy tale ending, that's his failure. Not yours." Ava's throat tightened. The words lodged there, jagged and raw. "You know what the worst part is? I believed him when he said we were in this together. I thought, if we could just get through one more round, one more doctor, it would all fall into place." Sophie's gaze softened. "You didn't fail, Ava. You just hit the wall first, and maybe that's the gift." Ava gave her a sharp look. "The gift?" "Yeah." Sophie leaned forward, eyes warm and fierce. "The gift of knowing when to stop running after people who don't have the guts to stand beside you when things get hard." For the first time that night, Ava felt something uncoil inside her. A knot of grief and exhaustion loosening just enough to let in the smallest breath of relief. Her phone buzzed on the table and both women glanced at it. A message from Dr. Lily Monroe. "Ava, I reviewed your latest labs. Please call me when you can. There's something we should discuss." Ava's heart thudded in her chest. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "That your doctor?" Ava nodded slowly, fingers hovering above the screen. Yeah, probably just confirming the inevitable. Sophie gave her a long, measured look. Or maybe not. Ava swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the quiet around them. The gentle hum of the fridge, the faint city noise outside, the thrum of her own pulse in her ears. She set the phone back down, pushing the message aside for the moment. I can't tonight. I just can't. Sophie nodded. Okay. But tomorrow? You call. Promise me. Ava managed a faint smile. I promise. They sat in silence, the weight of the evening settling around them like an old, familiar blanket. Sophie rested her head back on the couch, closing her eyes, and Ava leaned into the soft quiet, feeling her own breath begin to even out. For so long she had moved through life like a storm, closing deals, launching startups, locking in success after success. And yet here, in a modest apartment with mismatched mugs and takeout containers, she felt more seen than she had in years. She turned slightly, watching Sophie as she dozed, the corners of her mouth twitching in a sleepy grin. For the first time in weeks, Ava's chest didn't ache quite so much. Tomorrow there would be decisions to make, calls to return, test results to face. But tonight, there was this, the quiet aftermath, the unspoken promise between two women who had survived their own heartbreaks and were still, somehow, standing. Ava closed her eyes, exhaling into the stillness. Outside, the city lights blinked on and off like tiny, stubborn stars. Ava sat in the plush leather chair across from Dr. Lily Monroe, her fingers nervously twisting the gold bracelet around her wrist. The fertility clinic's office was too calm. Soft gray walls, a vase of white tulips, the faint scent of lavender. A place designed to soothe women whose hearts were quietly breaking. Lily leaned forward slightly, hands folded on the desk. Ava, I reviewed all your records, including the last 3 cycles. Ava offered a tight, practiced smile. Let me guess. It's time to call it. Lily shook her head, her voice gentle but clear. Actually, that's not what I was going to say. Ava froze. There's no medical evidence that you can't conceive, Lily continued. Your hormone levels are within normal range, and your ovarian reserve looks promising for your age. Ava blinked. But the IVF cycles, the failures, were not likely due to you, Lily said softly. Has Daniel ever been evaluated? A chill slid down Ava's spine. She looked down at her hands, skin pale against the dark bracelet. He said he was fine, that he'd been tested years ago. Lily nodded calmly. That may have been true then, but fertility is a shared journey, Ava. And sometimes the answers surprise us. Ava let out a shaky breath. She had come here prepared to grieve, to close the door. Instead, she was staring at a door she didn't even know existed. I know this is a lot, Lily added. Take time to think, but don't assume the chapter is over. Ava rose slowly, gathering her coat. Thank you, she murmured, her voice raw. As she stepped into the crisp afternoon light, the city around her felt sharper, more alive. Horns blared, people rushed by with coffee cups and grocery bags. And for the first time in weeks, Ava didn't feel invisible in the blur. Her phone buzzed. She hesitated, then answered. Hey, Soph. Sophie's voice crackled with urgency. Are you home yet? Turn on the news, Channel 7. Ava ducked into a coffee shop, ordered a tea, and pulled up the news app. Her stomach tightened. There was Daniel, standing at a podium in a sleek conference room, cameras flashing. Behind him, the logo of his biotech firm gleamed like a crown. We're proud to announce the launch of the Pierce Foundation for Genetic Research, he was saying, his smile smooth, controlled. A commitment to the future, innovation, family, legacy. Ava's tea sat untouched, her jaw clenched as she watched Daniel step down, flashing that practiced grin at the reporters. Legacy. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. She didn't realize Sophie was still on the line until her friend spoke again. "Are you okay?" Ava forced a laugh. "Oh, just peachy." "I'm coming over tonight," Sophie declared. "We'll order pizza and watch trashy TV." You can swear at the screen every time a man says, "legacy." Ava smiled faintly, despite herself. Deal. But when she arrived home that evening, kicking off her heels and sinking into the vastness of her penthouse, the quiet pressed in harder than usual. She wandered to the nursery she'd once painted, pale yellow, the room she had locked after the last failed cycle. She stood at the door now, hand on the knob, heart pounding. When she finally pushed it open, the scent of paint and lavender drifted out, soft and heartbreaking. The crib was still there, unused. The mobile above it hung motionless, little stars frozen mid-spin. Ava crossed the room slowly, fingertips brushing the edge of the crib. She let herself sink to the carpet, knees pulled to her chest. The doctor's words rang in her head. "Not you." The sudden rush of anger caught her by surprise, not just at Daniel, but at herself. For waiting, for believing, for tethering her dreams to someone who had made her feel less, smaller, incomplete. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Sophie. "Whenever you're ready to talk about next steps, I'm here. We'll figure this out. Love you." Ava's hand curled around the phone, pressing it to her chest. For the first time in a long while, a small, wild thought sparked inside her. She wasn't done. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't need anyone else to finish the story she had always wanted to write. Daniel Pierce sat in the corner office of his biotech empire, the sun casting long streaks of gold across the minimalist glass and steel space. He should have felt triumphant. The Pierce Foundation launch had been a public relations coup. Investors were calling. Reporters were circling. But as he leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the city skyline, all he felt was a restless hollowness gnawing at the edge of his chest. He hadn't slept well in weeks. The knock came soft but firm. "Come in," Daniel called. Elliot Banks, his longtime business partner and oldest friend, stepped inside. Elliot was everything Daniel wasn't tonight. Relaxed, rumpled, faintly amused. "Your speech was solid," Elliot said, dropping into a chair without invitation. "A little heavy on the legacy talk, but I get it. The board loves that crap." Daniel offered a thin smile. "It's what they expect." Elliot steepled his fingers, studying him. "And what about what you expect?" Daniel frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Elliot shrugged. "Look, I've known you 20 years. I've seen you close impossible deals and walk out of boardrooms untouched. But lately, you're wound tighter than I've ever seen." Daniel rose, walking to the window. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Elliot's voice softened. "You blew up the best relationship you've ever had over—" "What exactly?" "Biology. And now you're throwing yourself into work like you're trying to outrun something." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's none of your business," Elliot sighed, rising. "You're right, it's not. But I'm going to tell you something you won't hear in these hallways." He paused at the door, glancing back. "You're the only one still pretending you're okay." When Elliot left, Daniel sank back into his chair, fingers pressed against his temple. His phone buzzed, dragging his eyes to the screen. A message from his father. "Don't forget the board dinner Friday. And Daniel. The family name matters." Daniel let out a hollow laugh. The family name, the bloodline, the unbroken chain of Pierces, from his grandfather's pharmaceutical empire to his father's hospital board seat. And now to him, the brilliant son who was supposed to deliver the next generation. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Ava, curled on the couch in their living room, laughter in her eyes as she showed him baby name lists on her iPad. Sophie on speakerphone, teasing. His own quiet hope, buried too deep to admit out loud. He swiped the message away. The test results were still sitting on his desk in a manila envelope. His doctor had called twice. He hadn't picked up. Daniel reached for the envelope, hesitated, then shoved it into a drawer. Not tonight. He needed control. He needed the clean, cold certainty of work, not the chaos of emotions he'd spent a lifetime keeping locked away. But as he leaned back, a sliver of doubt pierced through. What if Elliot was right? What if the legacy he was fighting for was the very thing destroying him? Across the city, Ava was curled on her sofa, Sophie perched cross-legged beside her, laptop open between them. "Okay," Sophie said, scrolling through profiles. "We've got donors ranging from former pro athletes to concert pianists to, I kid you not, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist." Ava let out a surprised laugh, something she hadn't done in days. "Oh, good. Maybe I can have twins who split the difference. One runs marathons, the other solves quantum puzzles." Sophie shot her a grin. "Hey, aim high." But Ava's smile faded as she leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "It's strange," she murmured. "For so long I thought this dream only worked if it was with someone. If it was us." Sophie reached over, squeezing her hand. "It still works. It just looks different." Ava turned her head, meeting Sophie's steady gaze. "You really think I can do this?" "I think you've survived things most women would have crumbled under," Sophie said quietly. "I think you're brave, and I think you're allowed to want this for yourself." Ava felt her throat tighten, warmth rising behind her eyes. Maybe for the first time she was letting herself want without apology. That night, as Daniel stood on the balcony of his penthouse, glass of whiskey in hand, the city stretched beneath him like a kingdom he no longer knew how to rule. His phone vibrated, a missed call from his doctor. A voicemail left. He didn't press play. In the distance, headlights weaved through dark streets, little pinpricks of light carving their own paths through the night. Daniel wondered, not for the first time, when exactly his had gone so off course. Ava stood in front of the mirror in her sunlit bathroom, a towel wrapped around her hair, steam curling along the edges of the glass. She studied her reflection, faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the soft weariness of someone who'd carried too many burdens for too long. But under the exhaustion, something new stirred, a flicker of possibility. Downstairs, her phone chimed again. Sophie, checking in. "Coffee later? Also, I saw an adorable yellow crib online. And yes, I'm already nesting for you." Ava smiled as she pulled on a crisp blouse. Sophie was relentless, a blessing, and occasionally an unstoppable force of nature. She padded barefoot to her home office, sunlight streaming across the sleek white desk, where a slim folder from Dr. Monroe waited. Inside were the donor profiles Ava had selected last night. She ran her fingers over the paperwork, heart pounding in a way that felt both terrifying and electric. For so long, she'd been waiting for someone else to complete her life. Now, for the first time, she wondered what it would mean to choose herself. The doorbell rang. Ava opened the door to find Sophie balancing 2 coffees and a paper bag, grinning like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. "Pain au chocolat," Sophie announced triumphantly. "If we're building your future, We need pastries." They settled onto the terrace. The city spread out beneath them in all its noisy, beautiful chaos. Sophie unwrapped a croissant. "So, tell me where you're at." Ava hesitated, cradling her coffee. "I'm scared." Sophie softened. "Good. That means you're alive. I'm scared of doing this alone. Of what people will say. Of what I'll tell a child someday when they ask why it was just me." Sophie reached across the table, her hand warm over Ava's. "You tell them the truth. That you wanted them so badly, you moved heaven and earth to bring them here. That's not a tragedy, Ava. That's a love story." For a moment, Ava's throat tightened, her eyes stinging. Then she exhaled. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Across the city, Daniel was pacing the edge of his father's estate, phone pressed to his ear. "Daniel, I'm saying this as your doctor and your friend." "Doctor," Grant said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to discuss these results." "I'm busy, Grant," Daniel snapped, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've got a board dinner and a foundation gala." "Then carve out time," Grant cut in. "You're avoiding this, and you know it." Daniel clenched his jaw, staring out across the immaculate lawn. The Pierce family's legacy spread before him in neat, perfect lines. The country club membership, the foundation plaques, the charity balls. But inside, he felt like a man gripping a glass about to shatter in his hands. He ended the call, slipping the phone into his pocket, and turned to find Elliot approaching, jacket slung casually over one shoulder. "Another retreat into the kingdom, huh?" Elliot teased, falling into step beside him. "What's the matter, Daniel?" "Empire getting a little heavy to carry." Daniel shot him a look. "Don't start." Elliot shrugged. "I'm just saying, you can keep chasing the next big deal, the next legacy project, the next perfect headline. But none of it's going to fix what's eating you alive." Daniel's shoulders stiffened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," Elliot murmured. "Because I've been watching you chase everything but the one thing that mattered." For a moment, the two men stood in silence, the evening wind stirring the trees. Then Elliot gave a small, sad smile. "Call me when you're ready to stop running." That night, back in her penthouse, Ava sat cross-legged on her bed, donor folder open on her lap, laptop glowing softly beside her. She stared at the photos, the profiles, the quiet promise of what could be. Her heart thundered. With trembling fingers, she picked up her phone, opened her messages, and typed, "Dr. Monroe, I'm ready to move forward." For a moment, she hovered, breath caught in her chest. Then she hit send. Ava closed her eyes, her hand resting lightly over her heart. The future was still uncertain, still messy, still terrifying. But for the first time in years, it was hers. Daniel stared at the ceiling of his penthouse, arms folded behind his head, the glow of the city slicing through the blinds in thin silver stripes. His bed felt cavernous. Cold sheets, quiet rooms, the hum of success in every corner. Yet none of it reached him tonight. The envelope sat unopened on his nightstand. He hadn't touched it since the doctor's last call. He reached for it, paused, then cursed under his breath and shoved it aside again. He was supposed to be at a charity dinner right now, shaking hands, smiling for cameras, tossing around phrases like innovation and commitment to future generations. Instead, he was here, raw and restless, drinking a $300 bottle of scotch that didn't taste like anything anymore. His phone buzzed on the dresser. Elliot. Daniel ignored it. Another buzz, this time a text. "Answer, you're not doing this alone." Daniel clenched his jaw, thumb hovering over the screen. Finally, he typed back, "Not now." He tossed the phone aside and dragged a hand through his hair. He'd walked away from Ava convinced he was sparing her disappointment. Now, all he could see was the wreckage he'd left behind. Across town, Ava stood in the nursery, barefoot on the pale yellow rug, fingers trailing over the edge of the crib. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old dreams. She exhaled slowly, resting her forehead against the cool wood. Behind her, Sophie's voice floated up the stairs. "I brought ice cream." Ava smiled faintly and made her way down. Sophie was unpacking 2 cartons on the kitchen counter, a bottle of Prosecco tucked under her arm. I know. Dairy and alcohol, terrible for stress. But I refuse to face life without at least one guilty pleasure." Ava let out a soft laugh, sinking onto a stool. Sophie set a spoon in her hand and perched across from her, studying her quietly. "So," Sophie murmured, "how does it feel?" "Making the call?" Ava stirred her spoon in the melting ice cream. "Terrifying. Liberating. Like jumping off a cliff and hoping I can build wings on the way down." Sophie's smile softened. "That sounds exactly right." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the kind of easy quiet that only comes with old friendship. Then Sophie leaned forward. "There's something you should know." Ava glanced up. "I got a job offer," Sophie said, voice hesitant. "A big one. Director of Counseling Services at a private school in Napa." Ava blinked. "Sophie, that's amazing." Sophie laughed softly. "Yeah. Except, I wasn't sure if I could take it. I didn't want to leave you right now." Ava reached across the counter, wrapping her fingers around Sophie's. "Sophie, you've carried me through the worst months of my life. You don't owe me anything." Sophie squeezed her hand, eyes misty. "Maybe. But I kinda like sticking around for the good parts, too." Ava's throat tightened. "You always will, but you have to go where your life is calling you." For a moment they sat there, the air between them thick with unspoken love and years of hard-earned trust. Meanwhile, Daniel's quiet was shattered by a knock at his door. He frowned, glancing at the clock. Midnight. He opened the door to find Elliot, leaning casually against the frame, 2 beers in hand. "Figured you weren't at that gala." Daniel let out a huff of surprise. "You're persistent. That's why you keep me around." Elliot slipped inside, setting the beers on the counter. "I'm not here to talk business, Daniel. I'm here because you're unraveling, and someone should remind you that you're still human." Daniel crossed his arms. "I'm fine." "Sure." Elliot cracked a beer and took a long swig. "And I'm an Olympic gymnast." Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want me to say?" "Start with the truth," Elliot said softly. "Start with Ava." The name sliced through the room like a wire pulled tight. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Finally, his voice broke the quiet, low and raw. "I miss her." Elliot just nodded. Later that night, Ava stood on her balcony, cool night air brushing her skin, city lights winking in the dark. Her phone sat beside her. No missed calls, no texts. She should have been relieved by the quiet. Instead, she felt the ache of absence, the ghost of a man she was trying to let go. She wrapped her arms around herself, eyes closed. Tomorrow, she would meet with Dr. Monroe to start the next phase. Tomorrow, her new chapter would truly begin. But tonight, she let herself feel everything: the grief, the hope, the sharp sting of letting go, and the tender possibility of something unknown and waiting just ahead. Danos Ava sat across from Dr. Monroe, the familiar lavender walls of the clinic pressing in around her. Sunlight filtered softly through the window blinds, and the faint hum of the city vibrated in the distance. She kept her hands folded in her lap, fingers restless, as Dr. Monroe reviewed the chart. You're responding beautifully to the medication, Doctor, Monroe said, a kind smile warming her face. We're right on track for the egg retrieval next week. Ava nodded, trying to keep her breath steady. It was happening. It was all really happening. But beneath the cautious optimism, a whisper of doubt threaded through her thoughts. Any questions, Ava? Dr. Monroe asked gently. Ava hesitated. I'm terrified. Dr. Monroe reached across the desk, resting a hand lightly over Ava's. Every woman who sits in that chair feels the same way, but you're not walking this road alone. Ava's throat tightened. She wanted to believe that, to feel Sophie's steady presence, her own emerging strength, the quiet army of support she hadn't dared to hope for. But the truth was, at night, in the hush of her penthouse, the loneliness still pressed in like a second skin. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel stood in the conference room of Pierce Biotech, watching a heated discussion unfold around the polished table. We need to fast-track this acquisition, barked Peter Liu, the CFO. The board expects a full report by Monday. Daniel's gaze drifted out the window, past the skyscrapers, to the glittering pulse of the city below. He should have been in this, sharp, focused, calculating the angles. But his mind kept slipping, drifting to thoughts of Ava, to memories he couldn't scrub away. The curve of her smile when she surprised him at his office with lunch, the fierce determination in her voice when she pitched her first company, the soft tremble in her hands, the night they lost their first round of IVF. Daniel, Peter snapped, pulling him back. Are you with us? Daniel cleared his throat, adjusting his cufflinks. I need you to handle this. I have other matters to address. As he strode down the hall, Elliot fell into step beside him. Skipping out on the Sharks, I see, Elliot murmured, his voice low. Daniel shot him a glance. Not now, Elliot. But Elliot only smiled knowingly. Not now, but soon, yeah? Daniel didn't answer. He just walked faster, like a man trying to outrun a truth barreling toward him. That evening, Ava sat curled on her living room couch, the city flickering beyond the tall windows. She was scrolling through emails when Sophie's name popped up on her screen. Subject: change of plans. Ava frowned, opening it. Hey, love. I'm sorry. The Napa school moved up my start date. I'm heading out next week. But don't panic. I'm still here for the egg retrieval, and I'll drive up and down as needed after. You've got this. I believe in you. Always. Ava leaned back, closing her eyes. The air in the room felt heavier. She knew this was coming. She'd encouraged Sophie to take the job, but the reality of it, the sudden absence of her closest ally, hit harder than she expected. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. For a split second, her heart leapt. Daniel? No, it was the clinic, confirming her retrieval date. She let the phone fall back into the cushions and wrapped her arms around her knees. In the quiet, she wondered, could she really do this on her own? Build a family, carve out a new life, hold the line when everything inside her trembled? The answer came not in certainty, but in the slow, steady rhythm of her breath. The same breath that had carried her through loss, ambition, love, and heartbreak. She wasn't sure, but she was going to try. Across the river, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, the unopened envelope in his hands. His fingers hovered over the seal. He thought about his father's voice, his mother's quiet disappointment, Elliot's pointed stares, the faces of his board, the cold weight of his last conversation with Ava. He wondered when the empire he built had started to feel like a cage. With a sharp exhale, Daniel slid his thumb under the envelope flap, tearing it open. As the pages slipped into his lap, his gaze sharpened, the first crack of vulnerability shivering through his polished armor. Ava stepped onto her terrace, the night cool and clean against her skin. She stood there for a long time, watching the lights of the city blink and shimmer, fragile, defiant, enduring. And somewhere across the dark, in a penthouse as silent as hers, a man sat holding the truth he had spent too long avoiding. Ava paced the kitchen, her bare feet soundless against the cool marble. A teapot hissed softly on the stove, the steam curling like ghosts in the dim light. The donor profiles sat on the table, papers half-strewn, her laptop blinking with unopened messages from the clinic. Her phone vibrated sharply on the counter. For a second, her heart caught in her throat. Daniel. It was the first time he'd reached out in weeks. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Ava. "Can we talk?" the message read. A wave of old longing and anger rushed through her. Sophie's words echoed in her head. "You don't owe him a damn thing." But another voice, smaller and more dangerous, whispered, "What if he's changed? What if this time it's real?" Ava closed her eyes, pressing the phone to her chest. Not now. Not yet. She silenced it and walked to the terrace, letting the night air cool her skin. Across town, Daniel sat on a bench in the park near Ava's building, elbows on his knees, watching the glow of her penthouse like a lighthouse in the dark. He'd read the test results 3 times, low motility, unlikely to conceive naturally. It was him. All along, it had been him. He thought about the years they'd spent chasing answers, the silent weight he'd placed on Ava's shoulders, the silent judgment, the quiet pulling away. And now, she was moving on without him. He let out a shaky breath, raking a hand through his hair. "Get it together, Pierce," he muttered under his breath. But the words fell flat. The next morning, Ava sat in Dr. Monroe's office, fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. "You're ready, Doctor," Monroe said softly. "Egg retrieval is scheduled. You've come so far, Ava." Ava managed a trembling smile. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Dr. Monroe reached over, squeezing her hand. "Thank yourself for that." As Ava stepped into the waiting room, her chest light with something close to hope, the glass doors slid open, and there he was. Daniel. Tall, tired-looking, hands shoved in his coat pockets, eyes raw and unguarded in a way she had almost forgotten. "Ava," he said, voice rough. "I need to talk to you." For a moment, neither of them moved. The receptionist glanced up from her computer, eyebrows lifted in polite confusion. Ava folded her arms, heart hammering. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" He exhaled, shoulders sagging slightly. "I read the results." Ava's breath caught. Daniel rubbed a hand over his jaw, searching for the right words. "It was me, Ava. I'm the reason. I should have tested sooner. I should have faced it. But I was a coward." A hush fell over the room. Ava's fingers tightened on her coat. "What do you want me to say, Daniel?" His eyes flicked to hers, wide, desperate, unpolished. "Nothing. I just needed you to know. I needed to stop pretending this was all on you." A long, trembling pause stretched between them. Finally, Ava spoke, her voice steady but soft. "I'm moving forward, Daniel. I'm doing this on my own." Daniel's face crumpled for a moment. Just a flicker, a crack in his polished mask. Then he nodded, swallowing hard. "I know." Ava stepped past him toward the door, pausing just briefly. "I wish," she whispered, that you'd shown up like this a year ago. And with that, she walked out into the sunlight, the city humming around her like a living thing. Daniel remained frozen in the waiting room, the quiet beep of the receptionist's phone the only sound. His heart ached in a way that felt bone-deep, unfamiliar. He realized then, legacy wasn't about power or inheritance or the next generation of Pierces. It was about presence, about being the man who stayed. And he hadn't stayed. That evening, Ava sat cross-legged on her bed, a carton of takeout balanced beside her, the clinic folder open on her lap. Her phone buzzed. Sophie, sending a photo of her new office in Napa, messy and perfect, with a caption, "You're braver than you know, love." Ava smiled, heart squeezing in her chest. She looked down at the paperwork, the dotted lines waiting for her signature, the future opening up like a door just slightly ajar. With a steadying breath, Ava picked up the pen, for herself, for the family she was choosing. As she signed, the city lights twinkled on one by one outside her window, 1,000 tiny reminders that even after the darkest nights, life kept shining forward. The night before the egg retrieval, Ava lay awake in her bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling as the hum of the city drifted faintly through her window. The papers were signed, the logistics in place. Yet inside, a storm churned. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow, as if some invisible weight pressed against her ribs. This should have been the moment she felt powerful, triumphant. Instead, the reality of what she was doing, what she was facing alone, cracked through the surface of her resolve. She reached instinctively for her phone. Her thumb hovered over Sophie's name, but the last message blinked back. "Rooting for you from Napa. Call me if you need anything. Love you." Ava smiled faintly, but her thumb slid away. She could call. She could text. But this part, this quiet reckoning with herself, no one could do for her. Across town, Daniel sat at the long dining table in his father's house, the dark mahogany shining under the chandelier's glow. His father, Charles Pierce, leaned back in his chair, a glass of scotch dangling from his fingers, the same weary disappointment lining his face. "I hear you missed the gala," Charles said smoothly. "Again." Daniel's fingers drummed against the table. "I had other priorities." Charles let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Other priorities? You mean stepping away from the company during the most critical merger in a decade? You mean chasing after a woman who—" "Don't!" Daniel cut in, voice low and sharp. Charles raised a brow. "I'm only saying what needs to be said." "The Pierce name carries weight, Daniel. Responsibility. You can't let sentimentality cloud your judgment." For the first time in months, Daniel felt the tightness in his chest snap. He pushed back from the table, standing. "I'm done letting you define what matters to me." Charles's mouth tightened, but Daniel was already walking away, heart pounding, breath jagged. Outside, the cold air hit his face like a slap. For the first time, he realized what Elliot had been trying to tell him. You can own a fortune, command an empire, but if you lose the people who love you, you have nothing. The next morning, Ava stood in the mirror, the clinic gown loose over her frame, her fingers trembling as she smoothed her hair behind her ears. "You ready, Ava?" "Doctor?" Monroe asked softly from the doorway. Ava turned, meeting the doctor's warm, steady gaze. "Yeah," she whispered, though the word caught on a wave of emotion rising in her throat. She followed Dr. Monroe down the hallway, the walls lined with soft art, the scent of antiseptic mixing with lavender. A nurse touched her shoulder gently, guiding her toward the procedure room. But just as Ava reached the threshold, she paused. Her heart thundered in her ears. For a terrifying second, the doubt surged. Can I really do this? Am I enough for them? She squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear slipping down her cheek. And then from deep inside, from some fierce, stubborn place that had carried her through every trial, every heartbreak, came a whisper. Yes. You are enough. When she opened her eyes, Dr. Monroe was smiling softly. Let's bring you one step closer to meeting your family, the doctor said. Ava nodded, exhaling, the weight in her chest lifting just slightly. Hours later, as twilight painted the sky in shades of indigo and gold, Ava sat in her penthouse, a blanket draped over her shoulders, cradling a mug of tea. The procedure was over. The waiting had begun. Her body ached, her heart felt raw, and the apartment had never felt so quiet. When the doorbell rang, she startled. Ava crossed the room slowly, confusion knitting her brow. She opened the door and froze. Daniel stood there, hands shoved into the pockets of his coat, hair tousled by the wind, eyes haunted but resolute. I'm not here to fix anything, he said quickly, voice rough. I know I can't. I had to see you, to tell you that I'm sorry, for all of it. Ava's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the doorframe. Daniel swallowed hard. I never wanted you to carry this alone. I see that now. And whatever happens next, whatever you choose, I hope you know you're the bravest damn person I've ever known. For a long moment they stood in the doorway, the city buzzing softly around them. Ava's eyes shimmered, her voice quiet but firm. Thank you, Daniel. But this part is mine. Daniel's mouth curved into the faintest, saddest smile. I know. And with a quiet nod, he turned and walked away. Ava closed the door gently, leaning back against it, her heart hammering in her chest. She felt emptied out and filled up all at once, like something had finally cracked open inside her, making space for the life she was about to build. And in that fragile, flickering moment between grief and hope, Ava understood. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Ava sat at the edge of her bed, the morning light spilling across the room in pale ribbons. The phone on her nightstand vibrated softly, and her heart leapt to her throat. This was it. She forced herself to breathe, smoothing her hand over her robe before picking up. Hello? Ava? Dr. Monroe's warm voice came through the line. It's Lily. I have your results. Ava's fingers tightened around the phone. I'm ready. There was a soft rustle of papers, a pause. You're pregnant, Lily said gently. For a beat, the words floated in the air, almost surreal. Ava blinked, her mouth opening, then closing again. What? You're pregnant, Lily repeated, a smile in her voice. And Ava, we're looking at twins. The room spun slightly, and Ava pressed her hand to her chest, a shaky laugh tumbling out. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the bed, tears springing hot and fierce into her eyes. Oh my God, she whispered, half laughing, half sobbing. Oh my God. Lily chuckled softly. I'll email you the details, and we'll set up your first ultrasound. For now, just breathe. Ava hung up, the phone trembling in her hands. She sat there for a long moment, staring out the window, letting the sunlight wash over her face. 2. Not just one life. 2. It was more than she'd let herself dream. Across the city, Daniel sat in the corner booth of a coffee shop, the news blaring faintly from the mounted television behind the counter. His coffee sat untouched, cooling in front of him. Elliot slid into the seat across from him, dropping his keys on the table. "You look like hell," Elliot said without preamble. Daniel let out a dry laugh. "I feel worse." Elliot leaned back, folding his arms. "So, are you going to tell me what you're planning to do about Ava? Or just keep brooding in public?" Daniel shook his head. "She doesn't want me involved." Elliot raised a brow. "Maybe. But maybe what she really needs is to see you show up without conditions." Daniel rubbed his hands over his face. "I don't know if I can be the man she deserves." Elliot's gaze softened. "Then be the man you've never been." "Start there." Back at the penthouse, Ava buzzed Sophie on FaceTime. Her friend answered on the second ring, hair in a messy bun, sunlight pouring through the Napa kitchen behind her. "Okay, spill," Sophie grinned. "What did Dr. Monroe say?" Ava tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked laugh. Sophie's eyes widened. "Oh my God, Ava, you're pregnant," Ava whispered, voice trembling. "And it's twins!" Sophie let out a delighted shriek, nearly knocking over her coffee. "Twins! Ava, you overachiever!" Ava laughed, wiping at her cheeks. "I'm terrified, Soph." Sophie's smile softened. "Of course you are, but Ava, you're going to be an incredible mother. And you are not doing this alone." Ava closed her eyes, breathing in her friend's words like oxygen. Not alone. Not anymore. That night, as the city buzzed below, Ava stood on her balcony, one hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. She looked out over the lights, the hum of traffic, the life she'd built, and the life she was about to step into. Her phone buzzed softly on the table behind her. "Daniel, I heard. Congratulations, Ava. Truly." She stared at the message, her heart twisting in her chest. There was no plea, no apology, no desperate attempt to claw his way back into her life. Just quiet acknowledgement. For the first time, she felt the sharp edge of anger soften into something bittersweet. She typed back, "Thank you, Daniel." For a moment, she hovered, thumb paused over the keyboard. Then, with a quiet breath, she added, "We'll be okay." She hit send, set the phone down, and wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the weight of her future pressing close. Fierce, overwhelming, miraculous. As the night deepened, Ava stood still and strong in the cool air, her heart wide open to the life that waited just on the horizon. The next morning, Ava sat at the kitchen island, a mug of peppermint tea cradled between her palms, eyes fixed on the quiet city stretching beyond her windows. The apartment was still, too still. The news of the twins had swept through her like a tidal wave, leaving elation and terror tangled together in its wake. She should have been floating, celebrating, calling her interior designer to redo the nursery. Instead, she was frozen. The sharp edge of fear had slipped in overnight. Could she do this? Could she be everything her children needed? Alone? Her phone chimed. Sophie. Checking in. "You've got this, Ava. Call if you need to panic or cry. Or both." A faint smile tugged at Ava's mouth, but it faded quickly. For the first time in her life, she couldn't outwork this problem. She couldn't strategize her way through heartbreak or negotiate her way around exhaustion. This was motherhood. Raw, real, terrifying. And no amount of money, privilege, or determination could shield her from the emotional storm ahead. She pressed a hand lightly to her stomach, where life was just beginning. "We're going to figure this out," she whispered, though her voice cracked halfway through. Across the city, Daniel sat on the worn leather couch in his therapist's office, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "I failed her," he murmured, voice hoarse. "Not because we couldn't have children together, but because I ran the minute things got hard." His therapist, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. "What do you think you were running from?" Daniel let out a rough laugh. "Legacy. Obligation. My father's voice in my head telling me what a man should be." "And what about your voice?" she asked gently. For a moment, Daniel just stared at the floor. His throat tightened. His chest ached. "I don't know," he finally whispered. "I don't know what my voice sounds like, without all of theirs crowding it out." The therapist's eyes softened. "Then maybe it's time to listen for it." That evening, Ava shuffled through the mail stacked on her counter when she froze at a familiar envelope. Monogrammed, sharp-edged, formal. Charles Pierce, Daniel's father. She hesitated, heart pounding, before slipping a letter opener under the flap. The letter was brief, cold, almost surgical. "Ava, I trust you are aware of the news regarding your pregnancy. While you and Daniel are no longer a couple, I expect you to conduct yourself, and any future public announcements, with discretion. The Pierce family is a respected institution, and I ask that you refrain from invoking our name in matters that do not concern us. Charles Pierce." Ava's hands trembled as she set the letter down. Discretion. Institution. Invoking their name. A sharp, bitter laugh bubbled in her throat. She wanted to rip the letter in two, wanted to march into that pristine marble mansion and tell Charles Pierce exactly what she thought of his institution. Instead, she picked up her phone and, without thinking, dialed. The line rang twice. "Ava." Daniel's voice was quiet, cautious. For a moment, she almost hung up. Instead, she drew in a long, shaking breath. "Your father sent me a letter." A pause. Then a sharp exhale. "I'm so sorry, Ava." Her voice trembled. "I'm not asking for you to fix it. I needed you to know." Another silence, softer this time. "Ava," Daniel said, voice low and raw. "If I could go back, if I could change every moment I failed you, I would. I know I don't have a right to ask for anything, but please, don't let my family take this from you. You fought too hard for this joy." For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then Ava's voice came, quiet but firm. "I'm not giving up, Daniel. I just wish you hadn't given up on us." Daniel's breath hitched on the line. "So do I." And for the first time, it wasn't anger or blame or old wounds pulsing between them. It was grief. Shared, deep, tender grief. That night, Ava stood once again on her terrace, wrapped in a soft knit sweater, the city glittering below like a sea of distant stars. She pressed her hands to her belly, closing her eyes, feeling the ache and the wonder of all she was about to become. Behind her, the phone sat silent. The past was no longer waiting on the other end of the line. The future, messy, wild, extraordinary, was waiting here, right where she stood. And Ava was ready to meet it. Ava stood at the window of her penthouse, the spring sunlight painting the hardwood floor in soft gold. One hand rested on her rounded belly, the other wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. The nursery was almost ready. Pale yellow walls, a pair of cribs assembled by a team of designers who'd nervously asked her 3 times if she was sure she wanted 2. She was sure. What she wasn't sure about, Ava realized, was the swirl of emotions tangled in her chest. Joy, yes, but also grief and anger, and an unexpected trace of forgiveness. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She reached for it automatically, hesitating as Daniel's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. Instead, she answered, "Hi," she murmured. "Ava." His voice was steady but unpolished, the polished businessman stripped away. "I'm outside." Her breath caught. She moved to the window and looked down, and there he was, standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, face tilted up to the building as if he could feel her watching. "Why?" she asked quietly. "I don't want anything from you," Daniel said. "I just wanted to tell you this in person. I've stepped down from the company. I've told my father to stay away from you. And if he doesn't listen, he'll be dealing with lawyers, not letters." Ava sank slowly onto the couch, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. "And I wanted to tell you," Daniel continued, "that I've started over. Therapy. Time away from work. Time to figure out who I am when I'm not chasing approval or trying to outrun my own shame." Ava closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Daniel added softly. I need you to know I'm trying to be better, even if you never see it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ava whispered, "I see it." On the other end of the line, Daniel exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and heartbreak. "I hope the twins inherit your fire," he said quietly. "And maybe, when they're old enough, you'll let me meet them. As a friend, if nothing else." Ava felt something in her chest loosen. Not a romantic reunion, not a neat ending, but the quiet, radical possibility of a new kind of connection. "Maybe," she murmured. "One day." Daniel chuckled softly, the first real laugh she'd heard from him in months. "Take care of yourself, Ava." "You too." They ended the call. For a moment, Ava sat still, the city humming outside her windows, her heartbeat steadying as she let the silence settle. Then she rose, walked into the nursery, and stood between the two cribs, one hand pressed to her chest, the other gently tracing the edge of a mobile. The room smelled faintly of lavender and new beginnings. Ava breathed in, slow and deep. This was her moment, not defined by a man or a marriage or a name on a letterhead. This was her life, her family, her hard-won joy. And as she looked out over the horizon of her own making, Ava smiled, feeling the fierce pulse of two tiny heartbeats and the quiet certainty that she was enough, that she had always been enough. Tea. The delivery room was awash in soft light, the quiet hum of monitors filling the air as Ava clutched Sophie's hand, her forehead damp with sweat, her body trembling with exhaustion and disbelief. "They're here," the nurse whispered, her face alight with gentle triumph. "Two beautiful, healthy babies." Ava let out a sound between a laugh and a sob as they placed the tiny, wriggling bundles on her chest. Two perfect, fierce little beings, pink-cheeked and loud-voiced, their cries filling the room with life. Sophie squeezed her shoulder, tears streaming down her face. "You did it!" she choked out. "You really did it!" Ava could barely form words. She kissed each damp forehead, her body shaking from adrenaline, her heart splitting open with a love so wild and unfiltered it felt almost unbearable. Two miracles she had been told might never come. As the nurses moved around the room, as Sophie bustled with calls to family and photos to send, Ava closed her eyes and rested her forehead against her babies, breathing them in. She felt their tiny hearts beating against her skin, steady and insistent, anchoring her to a world that had felt so uncertain for so long. Weeks later, Ava stood on the balcony of her penthouse, the city's summer breeze brushing her face, one baby strapped snug against her chest while the other napped inside. Her life had reshaped itself overnight, no longer ruled by boardrooms and deadlines, but by midnight feedings, soft lullabies, and the small, earth-shaking moments that filled each day with meaning. She hadn't returned to work yet. Her board had offered her all the time she needed, and for once, she'd said yes. She was learning that power could look like saying no, that success could look like a messy living room and unwashed hair and whispered, "I love yous" at 3 a.m. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. It was Daniel. "Ava, just checking in. Hope you and the twins are well. No rush on this, but if and when you're ready, I'd love to meet them. Wishing you all the joy in the world." Ava read the message twice, a smile tugging at her lips. Not a wistful smile, not a regretful one, but the kind that came when a chapter had truly closed and another had opened. She typed back, "Thank you, Daniel. We're happy. I'll let you know when the time feels right." For a long moment, she simply stood there, rocking her child gently as the city pulsed around her. Behind her, Sophie emerged from the kitchen, holding the other baby with practiced ease, a glass of sparkling water balanced in her free hand. "You," Sophie teased, "are a goddess." Ava laughed, soft and full. "No, I'm a woman surviving on 2 hours of sleep and sheer determination." Sophie grinned. Same thing. They settled onto the couch, the soft coos of the babies filling the room, the warm summer light casting golden patterns across the floor. As they sat in the quiet, Ava felt something click into place deep inside her. For so long, she had measured her life in achievements, in accolades, in the relentless chase of more. Now, she measured it in heartbeats, in the weight of her babies in her arms, in the steady presence of Sophie at her side, in the knowledge that she had built this, not from wealth, but from will. Not from luck, but from grit. And when she closed her eyes that night, long after the city had quieted and her children lay sleeping, Ava understood something she hadn't known when this journey began. She hadn't lost anything. She had simply found herself. The ballroom at the Four Seasons glittered under 1,000 crystal lights, the hum of conversation and clinking glasses rising into the vaulted ceiling. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras trained on the stage where Ava Sterling was about to be honored as Tech Innovator of the Year. But tonight, Ava's mind wasn't on the award. It was on the 2 tiny faces waiting at home, snuggled into Sophie's arms, their chubby fingers curled around the world's safest baby bottles, and on the journey that had led her here. Not the glamorous road of business deals and boardroom victories, but the rough, unpaved one of heartbreak, reckoning, and fierce, uncompromising love. As her name was announced, Ava stepped onto the stage, her gown skimming the floor, her heart steady in a way she hadn't felt in years. The applause swelled, and for a fleeting second, she saw Daniel near the back of the room. No fanfare, no attention-seeking, just quiet respect in his eyes. She gave the slightest nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had survived, and moved to the podium. "Thank you," Ava began, her voice clear and warm. "When I first started in this industry, I believed success was something you built with your hands, your mind, your willpower. I thought it lived in the next innovation, the next deal, the next zero on the check." She paused, scanning the sea of expectant faces. "But it turns out, success isn't just about what you build. It's about what you choose to carry with you. About the people you hold close, about the love you fight for, even when it doesn't come in the package you imagined." A hush settled over the room, the cameras blinking silently. "This year," she continued, her throat tightening just slightly, "I became a mother. to two beautiful, stubborn, tiny humans who have already taught me more about resilience and joy than any boardroom ever could. And I stand here tonight, not in spite of them, but because of them. In the back, Sophie lifted her champagne glass, grinning fiercely. Ava's gaze softened. So here's what I know now. Power is not control. It's vulnerability. It's having the courage to face yourself in the dark and still choose to rise in the morning. It's knowing that wealth means nothing without meaning, and meaning comes from love. She took a slow, steadying breath. And if I can leave you with anything tonight, it's this. The best kind of legacy you can leave isn't the company you build or the fortune you amass. It's the lives you touch, the people you show up for, and the children you raise to believe they are enough, just as they are. The room erupted in applause, but Ava felt a stillness settle in her chest, a quiet peace she hadn't known in years. As the ceremony ended, she slipped away from the crowd, shoes in hand, the cool night air wrapping around her like a soft benediction. She walked to the waiting car, heart pounding in anticipation, not for another meeting or deal, but to get home. Home. She opened the front door to the sound of soft baby breaths. Sophie's whispered goodnight as she tiptoed out of the nursery. Ava peeked into the room, leaning on the doorframe, her chest aching with love as she watched her twins sleep. Their little fists curled under their chins, their tiny bodies rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Sophie slipped up beside her. "Rockstar speech," she murmured. Ava smiled, resting her head lightly against her friend's shoulder. "Thanks for holding it all together while I figured myself out." "You held yourself together," Sophie whispered back. "I just made sure you ate occasionally." They shared a quiet laugh, and Sophie squeezed her hand before heading home. Ava stood alone now in the dim hallway, barefoot, gown trailing behind her, watching her babies as the city lights twinkled beyond the window. This was her kingdom, her empire. Not built from stocks and headlines, but from late-night feedings, whispered lullabies, and the unshakable belief that love, real, messy, imperfect love, was the only legacy that mattered. And as she turned off the nursery light, Ava Sterling stepped fully, finally, into the life she had fought so hard to claim.